It was a night like no other, a glitzy gala in the heart of New York City where some of the most influential people in the world gathered to celebrate art, culture, and innovation. A sprawling ballroom with crystal chandeliers, elegantly dressed guests, and the hum of private conversations created the perfect backdrop for a night of high society. But for Elon Musk, this night would become something entirely different. Something that would change how he saw himself, and how the world saw him. As the evening wore on, Musk sat at his table, the laughter and chatter around him just a distant hum. He wasn't a man of many words in social settings, preferring to observe, his mind always ticking in the background. But tonight, a certain conversation was unfolding, one that would soon take center stage in his life. Across the room, Samuel Clarke, a renowned pianist and a legend in the world of classical music, was holding court. His tall, commanding figure was the picture of sophistication. His sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the room with the same calculated precision he applied to his music. Clarke was known for his unmatched skill, his perfect touch on the piano, and his equally perfect arrogance. The man was an artist, and he knew it. His reputation had built a fortress around him, and it was clear he had little patience for those he deemed beneath him. And that's where Elon Musk came in. Clarke, in a rare moment of public candor, turned to his audience and made a remark that would be the catalyst for everything that followed. Technology, space, cars. These are the toys of men who think they can conquer the universe. But the true soul of humanity, the true test of greatness, Clarke's voice dropped to a dramatic whisper, is found in music. And Elon Musk, for all his genius, will never understand that. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the crowd, but Musk, sitting a few tables away, felt something deep inside him. The word stung, and the subtle yet unmistakable mockery in Clarke's voice hit harder than expected. He had been many things in his life, a visionary, a disruptor, a billionaire. But never had he been publicly criticized by a man like Samuel Clarke, someone whose world was so far removed from his own. The remark wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge. And in that moment, Musk, always up for a challenge, made a decision that would reverberate throughout the rest of the evening, and perhaps even beyond. He stood up. His friends at the table looked at him in surprise, but Musk didn't acknowledge them. He walked toward the grand piano at the far end of the ballroom, his mind racing. He wasn't a pianist, not by any stretch of the imagination. He didn't even know how to read sheet music properly. But Clarke had mocked him, and Musk hated being underestimated. He couldn't let it slide. He couldn't let anyone think he wasn't capable of mastering anything he put his mind to. As he approached the piano, the murmurs of the crowd started to rise. Eyes turned toward him, curiosity building. Samuel Clarke, sitting comfortably at his table, raised an eyebrow. The man who had just been ridiculing Musk was now watching him intently, the challenge clearly issued, yet unsure of what Musk would do. Musk sat down at the piano. His fingers brushed the keys lightly, almost experimentally, as the audience waited with bated breath. The soft, uncertain sound of his first few notes echoed through the room. Off-key, disjointed, far from what anyone might expect from a man who had revolutionized multiple industries. But for Musk, the discomfort of the moment didn't matter. He didn't care about the onlookers' expectations. What mattered was that he had been publicly humiliated, and this was his chance to rewrite the narrative. He wasn't going to walk away from this. Not now, not when everyone was watching. Samuel Clarke, a man who prided himself on his art, stared at Musk with a mixture of amusement and condescension. "Go ahead, Mr. Musk," Clarke said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see if your genius extends to more than just electric cars and rockets." The challenge hung in the air like an electric charge. Musk took a deep breath, letting the sound of the crowd fade into the background. He was a man who thrived under pressure, who had made a name for himself by diving into the unknown. Space exploration, self-driving cars, renewable energy, he had turned industries upside down. But music? That was a different beast entirely. And yet, something inside him told him that if he could conquer this, he would prove to the world, and to himself, that there was nothing he couldn't achieve. He let his fingers hover over the keys for a moment longer, then he began to play again, this time more deliberately. The sound that emerged was still raw, unrefined, and nowhere near what the audience was expecting, but it was different this time. There was intent behind the notes, a glimmer of something more. The crowd's interest peaked. Clark leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. He hadn't expected Musk to take him up on the challenge, let alone attempt to play in front of such a distinguished audience. For Musk, the sound of the piano was strangely soothing. As he stumbled through the keys, a part of him felt like he was solving a puzzle, breaking down an obstacle piece by piece. It wasn't just about proving Clark wrong anymore, it was about showing himself that he could adapt, that he could grow, that he could thrive in the face of public scrutiny. But the longer he played, the more it became apparent, this was going to be harder than anything he had done before. His fingers felt awkward, clumsy, as if they weren't made for this kind of task. He had mastered coding, engineering, and innovation, but music required something deeper, something far more personal. His mind raced, and his nerves started to fray. What had he gotten himself into? Clark, sensing Musk's growing discomfort, couldn't resist. He leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. "See, it's not so easy, is it?" The words stung, but they also fueled Musk's determination. He wasn't going to let this pianist, or anyone else, dictate what he could or couldn't do. He had built an empire from scratch, after all. What was a piano, really, in comparison? The crowd waited in silence, their eyes locked on Musk. The tension was palpable. It was a moment of vulnerability for the tech mogul, one that even his supporters had never seen before. And yet, as he pressed onward, the thought that kept running through Musk's mind was simple: I can't back down now. Not from this challenge. Not from anything. It wasn't about proving himself to Clark. It was about proving himself to the world. And to the one person who mattered most in that moment, himself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had always been a man who thrived on challenges. But the man sitting at the piano, awkwardly fumbling through the keys, wasn't the same person who had become one of the most influential tech moguls in the world. To understand why he would risk humiliation at the grand piano, you have to look at the years that had shaped him, the moments that had made him the relentless innovator, the loner, the dreamer who saw possibilities where others saw walls. Musk's story didn't begin in Silicon Valley, but thousands of miles away, in Pretoria, South Africa. Born in 1971 to a Canadian mother and a South African father, his childhood was a stark contrast to the glossy, polished world of fame he now inhabited. His father, Elon Musk, was a wealthy engineer, but their relationship was strained, distant, and often toxic. Elon had spent most of his youth feeling like an outsider in his own home, caught between the sharp, cold expectations of his father and the softness of his mother's gentle love. Growing up, he was a bookworm. The other kids at school bullied him, calling him a nerd. But Elon didn't mind. Books were his refuge. He devoured science fiction novels, read about rocket ships and artificial intelligence, and imagined a future where he could change the world. He saw technology as his ticket out of South Africa, out of the pain, out of the isolation. At the age of 17, he moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, escaping the oppressive environment of his family and home. But it wasn't just the geographic distance that changed his life, it was the shift in mindset. In Canada, he met new people who didn't just want to exist, they wanted to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible. Elon's drive had always been innate, but being surrounded by like-minded individuals pushed him further into his ambition. From there, it was only a matter of time before he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. But even as he excelled academically, something still gnawed at him. His father had told him, time and time again, that he would never amount to anything. That he would never achieve greatness. Those words were like an ever-present shadow, following him from the moment he was old enough to understand his father's disdain. It was in the face of that relentless negativity that Elon made his first big decision: he was going to change the world. He wasn't just going to be another entrepreneur. He wasn't going to settle for mediocrity or take the conventional route. He was going to disrupt industries and forge new paths that had never been imagined before. He co-founded Zip2, a software company that aimed to revolutionize how businesses interacted with the internet. His early days were full of sleepless nights, coding, and scrappy startup culture, but Zip2 was ultimately sold for nearly $300 million. That success gave Musk the financial freedom to pursue his next big idea, a payment system called X.com, which would eventually become PayPal, and the rest, as they say, is history. However, despite his growing fortune, Elon had always felt something was missing. The technology was exciting, yes, but there was an emptiness in his personal life. He had been married 3 times, twice to the same woman, and had children, but his relationships were often strained. Work consumed him, leaving little room for the intimacy and connection that most people take for granted. He would often find himself working 100-hour weeks, pushing his teams at SpaceX and Tesla to the limit, convinced that the only way to make a difference in the world was through sheer determination and a relentless pursuit of his dreams. The personal toll was immense, but Elon didn't know how to stop. The external validation of his success felt hollow, and the more accolades he received, the more isolated he became. His passion for space and electric vehicles wasn't just about changing the world, it was about finding purpose, about proving to himself that he could do more than just build a company. It was about escaping the shadow of his father's cruelty and carving out his own legacy. But what was his true legacy? Was it the billion-dollar companies, the trips to Mars, the cars on the road? Or was there something more, something deeply personal, that he had yet to discover? And that's when the piano challenge, the one he had so impulsively accepted at the gala, started to make sense. Musk had faced public criticism countless times before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about his tech empire, his innovations, or his ability to build rockets. It was about proving that he was a complete person, one who could tackle not only technology but art, something that many people, especially his critics, considered to be beyond him. He wasn't just trying to show Samuel Clarke or the world that he could play the piano. No, Musk was trying to show himself that he could master more than just numbers, systems, and formulas. He wanted to prove that he was more than just a tech mogul, more than just a man who built electric cars and sent people to space. He wanted to break free from the identity that had been shaped for him over the years and show that he could be multidimensional, capable of mastering whatever he set his mind to, no matter how far out of his comfort zone. As he sat there, remembering his past, the challenges, the loneliness, and the self-doubt, Musk realized something crucial. The mockery from Clarke wasn't just an insult to his abilities as a musician, it was a reminder of something deeper, something that had always driven him, the relentless pursuit of greatness, even when the odds were against him. And so, as the piano keys continued to echo in the grand ballroom, Musk was no longer just a man who could conquer the tech world. He was a man who was going to tackle this challenge with the same intensity he had put into every other venture in his life. The soft murmurs in the ballroom grew louder, and the once tantalizing sparkle of the chandeliers seemed to dim as the atmosphere thickened with tension. Elon Musk sat at the grand piano, awkwardly pressing his fingers into the keys, while the gaze of every guest seemed fixed on him. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their curiosity, but more than anything, he felt the presence of Samuel Clarke's eyes bearing down on him from across the room. The pianist was watching, his gaze laced with disbelief, as if trying to understand what kind of person would challenge him on his turf. For Musk, this was more than a simple impromptu performance, it was personal. For years, he had been the subject of public scrutiny. But nothing had stung quite like the mockery from someone who had mastered their craft in a way that was alien to Musk. Samuel Clarke, with all his elegance and confidence, had painted him as a mere tech enthusiast, a man of machines and numbers, unable to comprehend the beauty and soul of music. The piano beneath his hands was nothing like the machines Musk had spent his life building. It had no manual, no engineering principles to guide him. There were no codes to debug, no systems to optimize. He was out of his depth, adrift in uncharted waters. But that made the stakes even higher. The challenge had been set, and Musk could already feel the tension building in the room. The stakes weren't just about music anymore, they were about him, his identity, and his place in the world. "Go ahead, Mr. Musk," Clark's voice had called out earlier, sharp and laced with derision. "Show us what you've got." The words echoed in Musk's mind as his fingers pressed the keys again, trying to summon some semblance of music, some spark of magic that would surprise them all, especially Clark. The notes that escaped were dissonant, uncoordinated, and clumsy. Musk felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. Every misstep, every note that failed to fall into harmony felt like another mark against him. Yet, deep within, there was an undercurrent of determination rising. He wouldn't let this be the moment he walked away defeated. But it wasn't just Clark who was watching now. Musk noticed the guests beginning to murmur amongst themselves. Some were genuinely curious, others barely holding back their amusement. A few even seemed sympathetic, hoping the tech mogul would somehow find his footing. The fact was, no one in that room had expected him to try, and now that he had, they were waiting for him to fail. "Perhaps you should stick to rockets, Mr. Musk," someone in the crowd muttered, just loud enough for Musk to hear. The comment stung more than he anticipated. Musk's fingers faltered, briefly hovering over the keys. A part of him wanted to give up, to walk away, to let the crowd think that he was nothing more than an overconfident billionaire who couldn't do anything outside his area of expertise. But no. That wasn't how he operated. It never had been. The piano was just another obstacle, one more thing in his life that had challenged him. He had faced failure before, plenty of it, and it had never stopped him. Zip2, PayPal, SpaceX, and Tesla, they all started as underdogs. He had been ridiculed, doubted, and dismissed at every turn. And yet, here he was. No, this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something. Musk took a deep breath, steadying himself. The crowd had grown quiet, the once expectant silence now replaced with an air of doubt. He could sense Clark's satisfaction from across the room. Clark's mocking smile only deepened as he leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. It was clear he didn't think Musk had the mettle to see this through. But Musk wasn't one to be easily deterred. As the sharp sound of a few more misplaced notes echoed through the ballroom, he decided it was time to refocus. "Think like an engineer," he told himself. "Break this down, piece by piece. What do I need to do to make this work?" He turned his hands over, adjusting his grip, placing his fingers more firmly on the keys. The audience was watching him intently, hanging on every small shift in his posture, every glance that flickered toward them. For a moment, Musk could feel the full weight of his isolation, the feeling that had plagued him his entire life. He wasn't just sitting at a piano now. He was standing in front of his critics, his detractors, everyone who had doubted him, everyone who had believed that his intellect was limited to just one domain. His mind flashed back to the countless late nights spent at his desk, coding by the light of a flickering lamp. To the years of loneliness spent in a garage, when all he had was a dream and an idea no one else could see. Those memories pushed him forward now, reminding him that he had never been one to shrink from an obstacle. If anything, this piano, this challenge, was an opportunity to prove something much deeper. And that was when the shift began. Musk's fingers started to fall more naturally onto the keys, tentatively at first, but with growing confidence. A simple melody emerged, fragile but recognizable. The room fell still as the dissonance started to fade, replaced by something a bit more coherent, a bit more musical. It wasn't a masterpiece, not yet, but it was a start. Clark's smug smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. It was becoming clear that Musk wasn't going to back down. The crowd, too, seemed to sense the change. What had started as a moment of embarrassment was now turning into something else, a defiance, a refusal to be cowed. Musk wasn't a pianist. He knew that. But he was a quick study. And as he played, he realized that it wasn't the perfection of the music that mattered, it was the intent. He was telling a story with his music, just as he had told stories with his companies. Every note was a step forward, every mistake was an opportunity to learn. But just as he began to get into a rhythm, the crowd was thrown off by something unexpected. Clark, unable to remain silent, finally spoke up again, his voice dripping with condescension. "I must admit, Mr. Musk, I didn't think you had it in you. But don't mistake this for music. It's charming, if not a little chaotic." The taunt was sharp, designed to provoke, to remind Musk of his place in this world. But instead of retreating, something inside Musk snapped. He wasn't going to let the man who had already belittled him take control of this moment. The music slowed for a moment as Musk pressed a few final notes, his mind quickly racing through the scales he had practiced over the past hours. He was no longer trying to play perfectly, he was simply trying to play. And as he did, he could feel something else, a realization that even in the face of doubt, there was a part of him that could adapt, that could master something new. This wasn't just about proving Clark wrong. This was about proving to himself that he could rise to any occasion, no matter how unexpected. The real challenge, it seemed, had only just begun. The tension in the room was palpable as Musk continued to work his way through the piano's keys. What had started as an awkward attempt now felt like a determined exploration. A battle between doubt and perseverance. Every note that Musk played carried the weight of something much larger than the music itself. It was as though each chord was an attempt to push back against years of limitations, of being told he wasn't enough, that his talents were confined to only one realm. But here he was, trying to make sense of the sound, the rhythm, the art that had always been so foreign to him. Around the grand piano, the crowd shifted, sensing the shift in Musk's focus. The sharp judgments from earlier were replaced by an uneasy silence, followed by whispers of curiosity. Musk wasn't the virtuoso they had expected him to be, but there was something compelling in his effort, something undeniably human in his vulnerability. But this wasn't just about music anymore. As the notes flowed, so did the memories. The moment he touched the piano was the moment he realized he was standing at the intersection of his past and future, between who he had been and who he was still trying to become. His thoughts raced, and he let the music become a reflection of his journey. As his fingers hovered over the keys, he thought back to his first venture into Silicon Valley, how everyone had laughed at his dream of building electric cars and rockets. The idea of space travel had seemed like a fairy tale to most. "You'll never make it," they had said. "Space is for governments and billionaires. Not for someone like you." But here he was, sitting at a grand piano, trying to make sense of the notes, like a child trying to learn a language he didn't yet understand. It was the same feeling he had when he first dreamt of SpaceX, of Tesla. The uncertainty. The mockery. The uphill battle that seemed insurmountable. But he'd faced those obstacles and come out the other side. The idea of failure, of the immense difficulty in breaking through, didn't scare him. It was part of the process. Just as he had worked tirelessly to perfect the machines he created, he knew that if he pushed through the discomfort here, if he fought against the urge to quit and the sting of failure, he could find something beautiful. A melody, yes, but also a deeper understanding of himself. He could feel the weight of the audience's eyes on him, but he pushed it aside. Clark's mocking smile seemed distant now, almost irrelevant. Musk wasn't just playing to prove a point to Clark anymore. He was playing for something bigger, for himself. To prove that he could always rise, no matter the odds, no matter how far he was out of his comfort zone. But the journey wasn't easy. With every note, his fingers hesitated, unsure. There were moments of brilliance, moments where the music felt almost right, and then there were moments of complete silence. When he'd hit a note that sounded utterly wrong, discordant. But Musk wasn't the kind of person to back down from those uncomfortable moments. He embraced them. As the music filled the air, a deeper understanding began to unfold. He realized that the very thing that made him an entrepreneur, his ability to adapt, to pivot, to embrace uncertainty, was exactly what he needed here. The piano wasn't just about perfect technique. It was about discovery. The same way he had discovered a new way to think about transportation or space exploration, he was discovering a new way to express himself. And though the world would never see him as a professional musician, it didn't matter. This moment, this challenge, was about something personal. Something only he could understand. And that's when it happened. There was a shift, a slight transformation. Musk's fingers found a new confidence, a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was him. A simple, melodic sequence emerged, like a breath of air that pushed its way through the stillness. He wasn't just playing notes, he was telling a story, weaving together his dreams, his failures, his triumphs, all through the sound of the piano. It was a journey he hadn't expected to take when he first sat down, but one he realized he was meant to be on. In the back of the room, Clark's eyes narrowed. His arms, which had been crossed so smugly earlier, now hung loosely at his sides. It was impossible to deny that Musk was finding his way, and though it wasn't the brilliance that would be expected of a trained musician, it was an undeniable expression of effort and intent. The crowd, too, began to react differently. The whispers had become softer now, filled with a quiet respect. Even those who had mocked Musk earlier began to soften their criticism. They were watching something rare, a man who was willing to fail, who was willing to look foolish in front of the world, simply because he believed in something greater. And the room began to understand what was unfolding before them. But despite the gradual shift in the room's energy, Clark's skepticism wasn't so easily quelled. He wasn't about to let Musk off the hook. As the last few notes echoed out, Clark finally stood up, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the arm of his chair as he approached the piano. "Well," Clark said, his voice dripping with an air of superiority, "I suppose that was interesting." Musk looked up, meeting Clark's gaze with a quiet resolve. He could feel the tension mounting again, as Clark's words hung in the air like a challenge yet to be issued. But Musk wasn't deterred. He'd come too far. He had faced too many battles in life to let one more man's opinion stop him now. "You're right," Musk replied coolly, his fingers brushing across the keys one last time. "It wasn't perfect. But I'm not here to play for perfection. I'm here to prove that we can always learn, always grow, even when it feels impossible. That's the essence of innovation. And that's what I've been doing my whole life." For the first time, Clark didn't know how to respond. His jaw tightened as he looked at Musk, then back at the piano, and for a brief moment, something shifted in him. It wasn't admiration, but something close to it, a begrudging respect for the man who refused to be confined by his limitations. The room was silent, everyone holding their breath, waiting for Clark's response. But Musk didn't need it. His journey, the one he had started on this piano, wasn't for the approval of others. It was for him. The room had fallen into an eerie silence, hanging on the edge of something unspoken. Elon Musk sat at the piano, fingers still resting lightly on the keys. The melody that had once been shaky now hung in the air, fragile but complete, like a delicate thread weaving through the tension of the room. Clark's earlier mockery had been replaced by something else, something that looked like a hard realization, almost a crack in his armor. Musk didn't expect applause. He didn't even expect the validation of a simple compliment. All he had wanted, all he had sought, was to prove to himself that he could step into the unknown and come out stronger on the other side. But as the seconds ticked by in the quiet aftermath, he found that something deeper was at play. He was beginning to feel something in the pit of his stomach, something unfamiliar in the face of all the effort he had put into his life. This challenge wasn't just a test of skill, but a test of his spirit. The way the piano keys had responded to him had mirrored the ways he had pushed the boundaries of technology, of space, of human endeavor. But now, as the room waited in suspense, Musk was struck by an unsettling realization. What if he had been chasing the wrong thing all along? It wasn't the first time this thought had crossed his mind. Over the years, Musk had often questioned the very reasons behind his relentless pursuit of innovation. The endless sleepless nights, the risky ventures, the emotional toll, it was all a means to an end. The end had always been about changing the world, about creating a legacy. But in this moment, at this piano, a thought loomed larger than any ambition he had ever had: what if success had never been the point? Musk closed his eyes, letting his fingers fall back into a loose pattern of notes, this time not aiming for perfection, but simply allowing the music to spill out. Each note seemed to reflect the complexity of his own inner conflict, a direct contradiction to the calculated precision that had defined much of his life. The music became an expression of his humanity, his vulnerability, his willingness to be exposed. For once, he wasn't the confident tech mogul in control of everything. He was simply a person, an imperfect, fallible human being, facing his fears and his uncertainties. Around him, the audience could feel the shift. They had come in expecting a show, a performance to be judged. But now they were watching something far more raw. They were witnessing a man at his most vulnerable, not playing to impress, but playing to express. And in that expression, they found a truth that wasn't confined to the ivory keys of a piano. It was a truth that resonated with them on a deeper level. An unspoken understanding of the human experience, of struggle and growth, of failure and redemption. Clark, who had been leaning against the back wall of the room with a scornful smirk, was now frozen in place. He had expected to see Musk fold under pressure, to crumble under the weight of his inadequacies. Instead, what he saw was something he had never anticipated, a vulnerability in Musk that mirrored his own. The pianist had spent years building a persona of infallibility, one that placed him far above the likes of someone from the tech world, someone who dabbled in things like music and art. But Musk, in his rawness and imperfection, had done something Clark had never allowed himself to do. He had shown that the pursuit of excellence was not about being perfect, but about embracing imperfection. The emotional weight of the moment settled heavily in the air, leaving everyone present in a hushed reverence. No one dared speak, as though acknowledging the depth of Musk's revelation would break the fragile tension that now hung in the space. Musk himself was lost in thought, his fingers still tracing notes that were no longer random but filled with a certain quiet wisdom. Finally, as the last note reverberated through the room, Musk took his hands off the keys, his gaze falling to the floor. The room held its breath. Then, breaking the stillness, Clark stepped forward. "Well," he said, his voice softer than anyone had expected, "I have to admit, Musk, you've done something I didn't think possible." Musk didn't look up immediately, unsure of how to process the shift in tone. Clark had never shown him anything but contempt until now. "Music has always been my life," Clark continued, his words measured, "and I've spent so many years trying to control it, perfect it. But there's something about the way you approached it, so unrefined, so human, that makes me rethink everything. I've spent my whole career seeking perfection, but maybe that's the real lesson here. Perfection doesn't exist. The beauty is in the struggle, in the willingness to fail and keep trying." Musk looked up then, meeting Clark's eyes. The pianist's words were unexpected, yet they carried weight. A part of Musk wanted to scoff, to deflect. But in this moment, he felt a strange sense of connection, something far deeper than rivalry. "I don't know about perfection," Musk replied, his voice quiet but firm, "but I do know that every failure brings us closer to something greater. And maybe that's all any of us can really hope for." The crowd, who had been hanging on every word, now erupted into tentative applause. It wasn't the loud, boisterous applause of admiration, it was the applause of recognition. They weren't just applauding Musk for his courage to step up to the piano. They were applauding him for the emotional vulnerability he had shared, for the raw honesty of the moment. Clark, despite himself, gave Musk a small nod of respect. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by something less tangible, something Musk couldn't quite name. But whatever it was, it didn't matter. Musk wasn't here for accolades, he wasn't here to win anyone's approval. He had already won, in his own way. For the first time, Musk understood what it meant to truly embrace failure, not as something to be avoided or feared, but as a natural part of growth. In that moment, he realized that the only thing that could truly hold him back was his own unwillingness to confront his weaknesses, to acknowledge the parts of himself that didn't fit into the image he had so carefully cultivated. As the applause died down, Clark extended his hand toward Musk, his eyes meeting the tech mogul's with a newfound respect. Musk hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "I've been wrong about you, Musk," Clark said, his voice quieter now. "You're not just about rockets and electric cars. You've got a depth to you that I didn't see before." Musk gave him a small smile, knowing full well that this moment wasn't about winning Clark's admiration. It was about something much more profound, an understanding of who he truly was, beyond the public persona. And with that, the room returned to its usual hum. But for Musk, something had changed forever. He wasn't just a tech mogul anymore. He was a man who had dared to fail, dared to be vulnerable, and in doing so, had discovered something far more important than any success. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The piano stood still in the center of the room, its ivory keys gleaming under the soft lights, yet it no longer felt like an instrument of mockery or challenge. For Elon Musk, the grand piano had transformed from a foreign object, a symbol of something he could never conquer, into a mirror of his own vulnerability. The notes, though far from perfect, had become a reflection of his own journey, a blend of failure, growth, and the constant push forward, no matter the cost. As the applause gradually faded into quiet murmurs, Musk sat at the piano, lost in his own thoughts. He wasn't sure what had changed in him during those few moments at the keyboard, but something profound had shifted. It wasn't just about the music, it was about what it represented, the courage to try, to fail, to confront the parts of himself that he had long ignored. Musk glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the audience for the first time since he had started playing. Their expressions had softened, some in admiration, others in quiet contemplation. Clark, who had once mocked him so openly, now stood at the back of the room, his posture less confrontational and more reflective. The change wasn't just in Musk, it was in everyone present. Clark's earlier comments about perfection had struck a chord with Musk. The more he thought about them, the more they resonated. Perfection had always been the goal, the driving force behind his endeavors in technology and innovation. But now, in the stillness of the room, he realized that perfection wasn't what mattered most. It was the relentless pursuit of progress, the ability to move through failure and still find meaning in the journey, that was truly valuable. Musk stood up from the piano bench, his legs feeling a little heavier than they had before. He wasn't sure what to do next, but he knew that he had to face the crowd. There was a part of him that still felt the urge to defend himself, to justify his actions and his place in the world. But in this moment, he realized that no defense was needed. The music, the vulnerability, and the lesson had already spoken for him. He walked toward the center of the room, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The crowd parted slightly, giving him space. Musk didn't need to say anything grand or profound. He simply wanted to acknowledge the journey they had all witnessed, a journey that wasn't just his own, but one that could resonate with anyone who had ever felt out of place, uncertain, or unworthy. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice steady, though his mind was still sorting through everything that had just happened. "I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came here to remind myself, and maybe to remind all of us, that it's okay to fail. It's okay to not have everything figured out. As long as we keep trying, keep learning, that's what matters." There was a pause, a moment of reflection, before the crowd responded with a slow but sincere applause. This time, it wasn't forced. It was genuine. They had witnessed something far beyond a simple performance. They had witnessed a man confronting his own limitations and embracing the unknown, something everyone in the room could relate to, no matter their walk of life. Clark, too, stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced with something softer. "I was wrong about you, Musk," he said, his voice no longer dripping with sarcasm. "This was more than just a show. It was real. You're not just a tech genius. You're a person, just like the rest of us. And that's something I can respect." Musk met Clark's gaze and gave a small, appreciative nod. He didn't need Clark's approval, but hearing those words meant more than he could express. It was the kind of acknowledgement that cut through all the bravado and competition. It was a recognition of humanity in its purest form. For Musk, the night had become something more profound than a challenge to prove himself. It had become a turning point, a realization that success and failure weren't opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin. He had spent years chasing what he thought was success, the next big idea, the next breakthrough, but now he understood that the real success was in the struggle itself. The journey, messy and unpredictable as it was the true victory. As the crowd began to disperse, Musk remained at the piano for a few moments longer, his hands resting on the cool surface of the keys. He was no longer just the man who had revolutionized electric cars and rockets. He was a man who had allowed himself to fail, to feel exposed, and in doing so, had found something greater than any of his past achievements. When he finally stood up from the piano and turned to leave, Clark called out to him one last time. "Hey, Musk," he said, his voice a mix of respect and curiosity, "you ever think about coming back to play again? Maybe not for an audience, just for yourself?" Musk turned back with a small, knowing smile. "Maybe I will," he said, and for the first time, the words felt genuine. "Maybe I will." As Musk left the room that night, he didn't feel like a failure, nor did he feel like a success. He simply felt like a man who had faced his fears and come out the other side, a little wiser and a lot more willing to embrace the imperfect journey that lay ahead. And that, Musk thought, was the real lesson. The days following Musk's impromptu piano performance were filled with a quiet but noticeable shift in his approach to life. He had never been one to openly reflect on his experiences or let emotions guide his decisions. Instead, he had built his career around logic, data, and relentless ambition. But now, the memory of that moment at the piano, of vulnerability, imperfection, and human connection, echoed in the back of his mind, shaping the way he saw everything around him. Musk's colleagues at SpaceX, Tesla, and his various other ventures were the first to notice the subtle change. The intensity of his work ethic hadn't waned, nor had his drive to innovate. But there was something different in the way he interacted with his team, something more measured, more compassionate. One afternoon, during a routine meeting at Tesla's headquarters, Musk paused in the middle of discussing a new model design. He looked around the table, meeting the eyes of his engineers and managers, and something in him softened. "You know," he began, his voice carrying more weight than usual, "I've been thinking a lot lately about how we define success here." His tone was calm, reflective, and unlike his typical sharp, efficiency-driven manner. It's easy to get caught up in the results, the finished products, the deadlines, the launch dates. But the truth is, there's a lot of messy work that happens before any of that. There was a moment of silence in the room. Everyone exchanged glances, not sure if they were hearing Musk correctly. Was this the same person who had been obsessed with the next breakthrough, the next big thing? The same Musk who had driven them all to achieve more, faster, and more efficiently? "Failure is inevitable," he continued, breaking the silence. "And that's okay. What matters is how we handle it. How we learn, adapt, and move forward. Don't be afraid to fail. In fact, don't be afraid to try things that might seem impossible. Because that's where innovation lives, on the edge of what we can't yet do." A soft murmur of agreement spread through the room. Musk was met with nods of understanding. This wasn't a speech about numbers or deadlines. This was about something deeper, about creating a culture that embraced vulnerability, risk, and growth. It was a new philosophy, one that aligned more closely with the lessons he had learned from the piano and the unexpected interactions that followed. Later that evening, as Musk sat alone in his office, reflecting on the day's meeting, he felt a rare sense of peace. He had always been driven by the need to achieve and to prove his worth, both to himself and to the world. But now, there was a shift in his mindset. The pursuit of perfection was no longer his primary focus. It was the pursuit of growth, learning, and human connection. Musk leaned back in his chair, staring at the window. The lights of the city stretched out before him, a vast expanse of potential. He thought about all the people who had supported him over the years, the engineers, the designers, the teams at Tesla, SpaceX, and beyond. They were the ones who had helped him bring his grand visions to life, and he realized that it was their willingness to fail, to try new things, that had led to their successes. In the past, Musk had been fiercely independent, often taking on the weight of the world himself. But now, he understood something that had eluded him before: the value of collaboration, of trusting others to take risks alongside him. The best ideas didn't always come from the top, they came from the people who were willing to get their hands dirty, who weren't afraid to fail. It was this realization that led Musk to make an unexpected decision the next day. He called a meeting with his team at SpaceX and Tesla, but this time, it wasn't about new product launches or futuristic concepts. It was about something more personal. "I've spent so much of my life focusing on the destination," Musk said, standing in front of the group. "The end goal. Mars, electric cars, changing the world. But I've come to realize that it's not the destination that matters most. It's the journey, and the people we share it with." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So, I want to open up more. I want you all to feel comfortable sharing your thoughts, your ideas, no matter how crazy they might seem. I want us to fail together and learn from it. I want us to create an environment where we all feel safe to try, and to learn from each other." There was a long silence. The employees exchanged surprised looks. Musk had never been this open, this vulnerable. The shift in tone was palpable, and it set the stage for a new era at SpaceX and Tesla, one rooted in collaboration, humility, and a willingness to fail. Over the next few weeks, Musk's leadership style became more hands-on and approachable. He attended more informal brainstorming sessions with his engineers and product designers, asking for their input on everything from rocket designs to electric vehicle aesthetics. He openly discussed his own failures, sharing moments of doubt and uncertainty, things he had never revealed to anyone before. It was during one of these sessions that Musk made a crucial realization: innovation wasn't just about new ideas, it was about the people who believed in those ideas enough to take risks. The success of his ventures wasn't solely his own. It was the collective effort of those who shared his vision, who had the courage to fail with him, to push the boundaries of what was possible. This mindset shift had a ripple effect. The teams at SpaceX, Tesla, and beyond began to take more risks, to push themselves further, knowing that failure was not something to fear, but something to embrace. Projects that once seemed too ambitious now seemed within reach, because the culture had changed. Everyone, from the engineers to the designers, felt empowered to pursue their wildest ideas, without the looming fear of failure. Musk continued to reflect on the lessons he had learned from the piano, from the unexpected encounter with Clark, and from the vulnerability that had, in many ways, unlocked a new chapter in his life. He began to realize that the pursuit of greatness wasn't about the relentless drive to succeed, it was about the willingness to grow, to learn from failure, and to connect with others on a human level. As the months passed, Musk's ventures began to reflect this new philosophy. SpaceX made even greater strides in their pursuit of interplanetary travel, Tesla accelerated the adoption of sustainable energy, and his other projects flourished in ways he had never anticipated. But more importantly, Musk felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the traditional markers of success. He had found peace in imperfection. Months passed, and the transformation in Elon Musk wasn't just a fleeting change, it was a fundamental shift in how he approached both his professional and personal life. His experience at the piano had unlocked something deeper within him, something that he had long suppressed in his relentless pursuit of perfection. It had made him realize that his greatest breakthroughs had often come not from avoiding failure, but from embracing it, learning from it, and using it to fuel progress. As Musk continued to lead his companies, a subtle yet powerful change began to take root. The engineers at SpaceX, the designers at Tesla, and his teams at the Boring Company and Neuralink all noticed the difference. Meetings that had once been tense, focused solely on performance metrics and deadlines, began to evolve into open forums for brainstorming, experimentation, and yes, even failure. For the first time, Musk encouraged his teams to take risks without the fear of repercussions. Failures were no longer viewed as setbacks, but as stepping stones on the path to innovation. It wasn't just about avoiding mistakes, it was about learning quickly, adapting, and pushing beyond the boundaries of what had been done before. The once unapproachable and perfection-driven Musk was now a mentor who shared stories of his own failures, his own missteps, and how they had ultimately led him to success. Failure is just a part of the process, Musk would tell his teams. If we're not failing, we're not pushing hard enough. And if we're not learning from those failures, we're not growing. This shift in leadership didn't go unnoticed. It had a profound effect on the culture of his companies. Employees felt empowered, not just to succeed, but to explore ideas without fear of judgment. Innovation flourished, and with it, the pace of development quickened. The energy within the teams became contagious, as everyone started to believe that they, too, had the freedom to fail and try again. At Tesla, engineers began experimenting with new battery technologies that were previously thought to be too risky. They pushed the limits of electric vehicle range, working tirelessly to develop solutions that had once seemed impossible. And at SpaceX, the spirit of bold experimentation led to the successful launch of the first reusable rocket, a milestone that many thought was years away. These achievements didn't happen overnight, but they happened because of the culture Musk had fostered, a culture of creativity, risk-taking, and learning from every mistake along the way. But it wasn't just within his companies that Musk's transformation had an impact. Outside of his professional life, the ripples of his newfound philosophy began to spread, influencing his personal relationships and his public persona. He began to speak openly about his own struggles with failure, mental health, and the pressures of being in the public eye. Where he had once been guarded and defensive, Musk was now more open, more vulnerable. He allowed himself to be human, to admit when he didn't have all the answers. In interviews, Musk shared his thoughts on failure, not as something to be feared, but as something that could lead to unexpected growth. People see the successes, he said during one interview. But they don't see the years of failures, the sleepless nights, the moments where everything seemed to fall apart. Those are the moments that shape you. Without them, I wouldn't be here today. His openness resonated with a wider audience, many of whom saw Musk not just as a tech mogul, but as someone they could relate to. His vulnerability made him more accessible, and for the first time, the public saw Musk not as a distant figure, but as someone who understood the struggles of everyday life. Musk's story of failure and growth struck a chord with many people, especially those in the tech and entrepreneurial communities. It became a blueprint for how to approach innovation in a world that often prioritizes speed and perfection over thoughtful experimentation. Young entrepreneurs, engineers, and innovators looked to Musk as an example of how to face setbacks head-on and keep moving forward. His companies continued to achieve remarkable things. Tesla's electric vehicles became the gold standard for sustainable transportation, SpaceX revolutionized space travel with its reusable rockets, and his ambitious ventures like Neuralink and the Boring Company sparked new conversations about the future of humanity and technology. But even with all these achievements, Musk's true legacy would be the culture he had built, one that celebrated growth through failure, one that encouraged taking bold risks, and one that valued the journey as much as the destination. Musk, however, never took credit for the cultural shift. He was quick to acknowledge the work of his teams, the individuals who had taken the lessons of failure to heart and turned them into triumphs. He recognized that while his personal transformation had started the change, it was the collective efforts of everyone involved that had brought the vision to life. The change in Musk also influenced his relationships with others. He began to value people more, seeing them not just as contributors to a vision, but as individuals with their own dreams, struggles, and challenges. In the past, he had been driven by an almost single-minded obsession with his goals. But now, he had learned to appreciate the people who supported him, the ones who had been there through the highs and lows, the ones who had helped him rise after each failure. One evening, as he sat with a close group of friends and colleagues, Musk reflected on how far he had come. He thought about the piano, how a seemingly trivial moment had ignited a profound shift in him. He realized that it wasn't just the act of playing the piano that had changed him, but the vulnerability it had forced him to confront. It had shown him that even the most successful individuals have their own doubts, their own moments of insecurity. And it had reminded him that the only way to move forward was to embrace those moments, not run from them. As he looked around the table, Musk smiled. "I used to think that success was about perfection. But now I see that it's about progress. About pushing forward, no matter how messy it gets." His friends nodded in agreement, understanding the weight of his words. For the first time, they saw Musk not just as a visionary or a leader, but as a human being, someone who had made mistakes, learned from them, and emerged stronger. The sun had barely risen, and Elon Musk was already at his desk, surrounded by the constant hum of activity at SpaceX's headquarters. The morning meetings had become routine, but today was different. There was an air of anticipation, mixed with a subtle tension that Musk could sense but couldn't quite explain. His mind was still buzzing from the accomplishments of the past few months, from the cultural transformation at Tesla, SpaceX, and beyond. Yet, as the hours passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was on the horizon. It all started with an unexpected email from a potential partner. The subject line read, "Urgent, issues with upcoming Mars launch." Musk opened it quickly, his heart rate accelerating as he read the contents. The email detailed several technical setbacks that threatened the timeline for the first manned mission to Mars. The innovations SpaceX had worked so hard to implement were facing unforeseen complications, and the launch, once planned for the following year, was now at risk of being delayed. As the details of the situation became clearer, Musk felt the familiar weight of pressure on his shoulders. He had come so far with this mission, SpaceX had been at the forefront of private space travel, and this mission was more than just a company goal. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for. The thought of failure, of postponing the Mars mission, hit him harder than anything he had experienced in recent years. He called an emergency meeting with the SpaceX leadership team. As he entered the conference room, he was met with concerned faces, all waiting for his direction. "We've encountered significant problems with the new fuel cells," Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, said without hesitation. "The prototypes aren't performing as expected, and there are safety concerns that we need to address. The timeline for testing and adjustments might push us past the launch window we were aiming for." Musk nodded, absorbing the information. For a moment, the room fell silent. The reality of the situation was settling in. This wasn't just a technical hiccup, it was a critical challenge that could delay their most ambitious project yet. Musk had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this felt different. It felt personal. "We're at a crossroads," Musk said, his voice quieter than usual. "Everything we've worked for, the years of testing, the hope of sending humans to Mars, all of it is now at risk because of these technical setbacks." For a brief moment, he felt the weight of his earlier beliefs, the belief that failure was just a step in the process, that setbacks were part of innovation. But as he looked around the room, he felt a flash of doubt. Could he really ask his team to embrace failure in this moment? Could he continue to lead by example, to show that failure was a learning experience, even when the stakes were so high? As the meeting continued, Musk realized that the challenge was not just about the technical problems with the mission, it was about staying true to the principles he had come to embrace. His philosophy of growth through failure was about to be tested in its most intense form. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Musk immersed himself in the technical details of the issue, working alongside the engineers to identify solutions. But as the pressure mounted, the cracks in his newfound perspective began to show. He had grown accustomed to embracing vulnerability and uncertainty, but now, in the face of such a monumental failure, he was beginning to question whether he could walk the talk. His leadership team could sense the shift. They saw the frustration in Musk's eyes, the rare moments of doubt creeping into his demeanor. He wasn't the same calm, reflective leader they had come to know in recent months. Instead, he seemed more like the old Elon Musk, the relentless visionary who demanded perfection and wouldn't settle for anything less. One afternoon, as Musk was reviewing the launch data, Gwyn approached him. "Elon, I know this is a critical moment, but we can't lose sight of what we've learned. The culture you've fostered here, it's about progress, not perfection. It's about pushing the boundaries, even if it means facing setbacks." Musk looked up at her, his gaze intense. "I know what you're saying, Gwyn. But this is Mars. This is different. What if we fail? What if everything falls apart?" For a brief moment, there was silence between them. Gwyn's expression softened. "You taught us that failure is part of the process. That if we keep moving forward, we'll find a way. We just need to trust the process, and trust each other." Her words struck him. He had been so focused on the potential failure of the mission that he had forgotten the lessons he had spent months learning, that setbacks weren't permanent, and that failure wasn't the end of the road, but the beginning of something new. That evening, Musk sat alone in his office, staring out at the stars from the window. The weight of the situation was still heavy on him, but he knew that this was the moment where everything he had come to believe was truly going to be tested. Could he accept this challenge, learn from it, and find a way forward? It was then that a thought struck him. This wasn't just a technical problem, it was a human one. The engineers, the designers, and the scientists at SpaceX were all part of a team that had built something remarkable together. This was not Musk's vision alone, it was a shared vision, one that required everyone to contribute, to fail, and to learn together. The very thing he had asked of his teams, the very thing he had embraced in his own life, was now something he had to practice in the face of uncertainty. The next morning, he called another meeting with his leadership team. The atmosphere was different this time. Instead of focusing solely on the technical details, Musk acknowledged the emotional weight of the situation. "We're facing something huge here," Musk began, his voice steady. "This mission means everything to us, but I've realized something. We can't let the fear of failure stop us from moving forward. We've learned so much from this setback already, and we're going to learn more. The road ahead won't be easy, but if we work together, we'll figure it out." Gwyn smiled, her earlier words echoing in her mind. "You've always said that we should embrace the challenges, that the lessons are in the hard moments. We'll get through this, just like we always have." Musk nodded. "We will. This is our journey, and every step, even the difficult ones, is part of what will take us to Mars." For the first time in weeks, Musk felt a sense of calm return to him. He understood now that the true test wasn't whether or not they could fix the technical problems in time, it was whether they could stay true to their mission, to their values, and to the belief that failure was just another opportunity to grow. The days turned into weeks, and the pressure of the looming Mars mission continued to weigh heavily on Elon Musk. But with each passing day, something remarkable began to happen. The tension in the SpaceX headquarters began to shift from frustration to determination. The team that had once been hesitant, unsure of how to recover from their setbacks, was now more united than ever. Their collective drive to solve the problem, to make Musk's dream of sending humanity to Mars a reality, grew stronger by the day. Musk, too, had undergone a transformation during this period. He'd shifted from a leader filled with doubt to one who fully understood that leadership was about more than just achieving results. It was about empowering his team to embrace failure and come out stronger. It was about fostering an environment where everyone, from engineers to scientists, felt like they were part of something greater than themselves. As the technical hurdles with the fuel cells were slowly worked through, Musk found himself spending less time in his office and more time out on the factory floor, engaging with the engineers directly. Gone were the days when he viewed himself as the solitary visionary, detached from the ground-level work. Now, he was hands-on in the process, listening to ideas, offering suggestions, and encouraging his team through every small victory and failure alike. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of testing, Gwynne Shotwell approached him with a concerned look. "Elon, we're close to a breakthrough, but we need more time. The adjustments are working, but the window for launch is shrinking. We might not make it this time." Musk paused, his face reflecting the conflict within him. Time was running out, but they had come so far. The thought of delaying the mission again was unbearable, yet he knew that he couldn't let his desire for speed blind him to the larger picture. Space travel wasn't just about making a timeline. If they moved too quickly without ensuring safety and reliability, it could lead to even worse consequences. "I know," Musk said after a long pause. "But we can't sacrifice quality for speed. We've come this far. I won't risk all of this dream, by rushing it. I've made that mistake before." Gwynne nodded, understanding his sentiment. "Then we'll need to make some tough decisions. We might need to push back the timeline again." Musk's eyes grew distant as he considered the situation. His mind raced back to his early days at SpaceX, when the company had barely survived its first few launches. There had been moments when everything seemed lost, when failure was staring him in the face. Yet, every time they stumbled, they got up, dusted themselves off, and kept going. He realized now that this mission was no different. Turning to Gwynne, Musk said, "We'll push back the timeline. But we'll do it right. Let's make sure everything is perfect before we take that step." As the decision was made to delay the launch, the team rallied around the idea that their work wasn't finished, it was just beginning. The extra time wasn't just a luxury, it was an opportunity to refine every detail, to ensure the mission would not only be successful but would set a precedent for the future of space exploration. The breakthrough came soon after. The fuel cells, once a point of failure, were now operating at a level that exceeded expectations. The engineers had managed to overcome the issues, and the new prototype was ready for testing. The team was buzzing with excitement and pride, knowing that they had turned a near-catastrophic setback into a defining moment. For Musk, this experience was not just about overcoming a technical challenge, it was about how they had approached the problem. They hadn't rushed, they hadn't settled. Instead, they had stayed committed to the long-term goal, recognizing that the only way to achieve greatness was through resilience and thoughtful decision-making. He saw firsthand the importance of slowing down, of allowing space for reflection and improvement, rather than rushing through with blind ambition. As the new launch date approached, the atmosphere at SpaceX was one of cautious optimism. The road had been long and full of obstacles, but Musk could now see the light at the end of the tunnel. They weren't just launching a rocket, they were making history. And with each test flight, each successful milestone, the team was inching closer to that moment. On the day of the final test before the scheduled launch, Musk stood on the launch pad, watching as the engineers prepared the spacecraft for its final pre-launch checks. The weather was perfect, clear skies, no wind. But despite the perfect conditions, Musk couldn't shake the nerves. The success of this test was crucial, and any failure at this point would set them back even further. Yet, as he stood there, watching the team work with quiet determination, a sense of calm began to wash over him. This was it. The culmination of years of work. The breakthrough was just one part of the larger journey, but it had come to symbolize everything Musk had come to believe in, that failure wasn't the end, but the starting point of something better. This was no longer about simply reaching Mars, it was about the perseverance to keep moving forward, to keep pushing through even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The countdown began, and Musk stood in silence as the final moments ticked down. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, just a deep, quiet sense of knowing that this was their time. The rocket engines roared to life, and the spacecraft lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky with a force and precision that felt like poetry in motion. As the rocket disappeared into the distance, the engineers erupted in cheers, their faces illuminated by the glow of the launch. Musk allowed himself a rare moment of triumph. This wasn't just his victory, it was their victory. They had faced the unknown, they had stumbled, but they had ultimately triumphed. They had proven that, despite everything, the future of space exploration was within reach. Later that evening, as Musk sat alone in his office, reflecting on the journey, he couldn't help but smile. The road to this moment hadn't been easy. It had been full of failures, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But that was the essence of progress. Without the obstacles, there would be no breakthroughs. Without the failures, there would be no lessons learned. Musk leaned back in his chair, a sense of peace settling over him. The mission wasn't over yet, there was still much work to be done. But for the first time in a long while, he felt that sense of quiet certainty that had eluded him for so long. He had always believed in reaching for the stars. Now, it seemed, he and his team were closer than ever to making that dream a reality. The final countdown had begun. Musk stood alone in the command center at SpaceX, watching as the launch preparations reached their final stages. The mission that had started as a distant dream was now within reach. The mission to Mars. The very goal that had driven him for years, was just moments away from becoming a reality. The culmination of setbacks, lessons learned, and perseverance was all leading to this one moment. But despite the external calm, Musk felt a familiar tension in his chest. This wasn't just about the rocket or the technology, it was about the future of humanity, the very dream that had sustained him through countless sleepless nights. He had often questioned whether it was worth it, the constant pressure, the endless work, the never-ending failures. But now, standing in the heart of the mission that would change everything, he knew that every struggle had been worth it. "How are we looking?" Musk asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. Gwynne Shotwell, standing beside him, checked the final telemetry reports. "We're good, Elon. All systems are functioning within optimal parameters. It's time." Musk nodded, his gaze locked on the massive screen ahead of him, where the rocket sat on the launch pad, ready to embark on its historic journey. The mission had been delayed multiple times, but each delay had only made the team more resolute. This wasn't just about meeting deadlines, it was about ensuring that every part of the mission was ready, that nothing was left to chance. The countdown clock ticked closer to zero, and the energy in the room was palpable. Musk had always believed that breakthroughs didn't happen without overcoming adversity, and this mission was the living proof of that. There had been times when failure seemed inevitable, when he questioned if SpaceX would ever reach this point. But here they were, on the verge of something monumental. As the seconds ticked down, Musk felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. The journey had been grueling, but it had also been transformative. He had learned more about himself, about leadership, and about the power of vulnerability than he ever expected. His transformation wasn't just in his approach to business, it was in his approach to life. In that moment, a quiet thought passed through his mind: this isn't just my victory. This is all of ours. The countdown reached zero. "Launch," Musk said quietly. For a brief moment, the room fell into complete silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, with a deep, rumbling roar, the rocket engines ignited, and the spacecraft slowly lifted off the pad. A brilliant flash of light illuminated the night sky, casting long shadows across the command center. Musk could feel the intensity of the moment in every fiber of his being as the rocket ascended into the unknown. The cheers erupted around him, but Musk remained focused. He could hear the voices of his team, but the sound seemed distant, like they were coming from a place far beyond the Earth. His gaze never left the screen, watching as the rocket broke through the atmosphere, pushing toward the stars. For a brief, surreal moment, Musk was filled with a sense of peace. This wasn't just the culmination of a single mission, it was the beginning of something greater. It was a victory for all of humanity. This was no longer just about Mars, it was about what this achievement represented: the boundless potential of human ingenuity, the willingness to reach beyond the known, and the belief that, with enough perseverance, anything was possible. Gwynne placed a hand on Musk's shoulder, breaking his trance. "We did it, Elon. We really did it. Musk nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. We did. But even as he basked in the glory of this historic achievement, he knew that the journey wasn't over. The true work had only just begun. This was merely the first step. They had proven that humanity was capable of reaching the stars. Now, the real challenge was ensuring that the path to the stars remained open for future generations. The mission was not just about sending a spacecraft to Mars, it was about creating a legacy that would shape the future of space exploration. As the rocket continued its journey, Musk thought back to the moment when he first envisioned this mission. It had seemed impossible then, just as it had seemed impossible when he first started Tesla or SpaceX. But he had always believed that the most important thing was to never give up, to keep pushing forward even when the odds were stacked against him. And now, as he watched the rocket disappear into the night sky, he knew that all of the struggles, all of the doubts, and all of the failures had been worth it. The final lesson had been learned, not in the victory, but in the journey. Every step, no matter how difficult, had led him to this moment. It wasn't just the success of one mission, it was the proof that anything could be accomplished if you were willing to embrace failure, learn from it, and keep moving forward. As the hours passed and the rocket made its way toward Mars, Musk sat quietly in his office, reflecting on everything he had learned. He thought about the people who had supported him, the ones who had believed in him when the world doubted. And he thought about the dream that had driven him all along, the dream of a future where humanity could live and thrive beyond Earth, exploring the cosmos and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Musk's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. A text from Gwyn. We're on course. This is just the beginning. Musk smiled to himself. He knew she was right. This mission was just the start of something much bigger. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?